A couple days ago, this guy, Xiaoma, had this video trending on YouTube. I got sent a bunch of different DMs from people on Instagram, and then when I looked at the title, I realized, oh man, this must have been very serious. Then I opened the video and he starts off with this.
Something very scary happened to me yesterday. Probably the closest I've come in a long time, if ever, to a near-death experience.
And I said to myself, wow, this is really serious, but obviously he didn't run out of fuel over the ocean, so what happened? As I watched the video more and more, I realized that this guy doesn't really understand aviation enough, and he's got himself so worked up that he starts crying during this video. Now, his intention probably wasn't to scare a lot of people that are already nervous flyers, but that was the impact that he had. During the video, he even gets into the bathroom and starts saying a goodbye to all his family and friends, which shows how seriously he thought this might be for himself and everybody on the aircraft, which just shows that if you're uneducated in a topic, it's very easy to get scared or nervous because you don't understand what's going on. And I know a lot of viewers watch my videos, so when their plane hits bumps, they don't act like this.
And we still don't know what the issue is. Any of these minor shocks of turbulence, it could be normal turbulence, or it could be your last moment on Earth.
Everyone who makes YouTube videos understands that the picture, the thumbnail of the video, and the title is what gets you clicks. But this title is a very long way from what actually happened. I wouldn't expect someone to understand the fuel systems of a 767, which was the plane that he was on when this happened, but here's his story.
Something very scary happened to me yesterday. Probably the closest I've come in a long time, if ever, to a near-death experience. It's a couple hours into the flight, maybe 2 or 3 hours, close to midway over the Atlantic Ocean. I'm sitting in the mid-row, and I see the captain come down the aisle and start looking out the window at the wing of the plane. Okay, so he's standing there, he's looking out the window at the wing of the plane. He's opening people's window sliders on the plane up to look out at the window. This is the captain, the guy who's flying the plane. He's reaching over people's seats to open the window, and he's traveling to multiple people's seats. So he's opening up one person's window, and then he's going to the next seat. He's trying to get the best angle to look at the wing at. It's kind of a scary sight to see the captain of the plane trying to get a physical look at the wing of the plane.
So he's not wrong. It is abnormal for a flight crew member to leave the flight deck to go back to look at the wings of the aircraft. That is abnormal. However, there is a point I want to make for some of you who are nervous flyers. During the winter times, there are times where we're actually required to go back into the cabin before takeoff and verify that snow or sleet or things like that haven't built up on the wings. So there are times that we're actually required to do it, but he is right. It is not normal for you to see a pilot go back and do that. But this winter, if you see a pilot do exactly what he describes here,
and I see the captain come down the aisle and start looking out the window at the wing,
realize that's nothing to be concerned about. The other thing to keep in mind is if you were to have a very, very serious problem on the flight deck, the captain is not going to be leaving where the controls are to come back into the cabin. You can't do anything from the back of the cabin. They're going to want to be up there on the flight deck where they can be in control of the plane. Realize that when your plane is in cruise, there's really a lot that can happen and have it not be a big deal. That's why the Miracle on the Hudson was such a huge issue, was because they didn't have any altitude, so they were very low to the ground with not a lot of options. Once you're up at cruise, it is really the safest portion of the flight, so as long as your plane is still flying, I wouldn't be concerned at all. I definitely would not be thinking something like this.
It's kind of a scary sight to see the captain of the plane trying to get a physical look at the wing of the plane.
I would realize, okay, well, we're probably 1 or 2 hours into the flight. We're probably not going to our destination because there would be no reason for them to come back if there wasn't a problem, but it's definitely not a life-threatening problem. Now, however, if I was sitting in first class right next to the flight deck and all of a sudden a couple of pilots came running up to get onto the flight deck, that would be alarming. But them leaving the flight deck to come back while you're in cruise, that's less of a concern.
And so I was seeing a bunch of whispering and rumors going on, but nothing officially from the flight deck until maybe an hour later, when the captain comes on and he says, I'm very sorry, but we have a fuel issue. And we're midway over the Atlantic at this point. And he says, we are going to need to return to New York. And he says the plane is momentarily going to make a right turn and we're going back And when we get back, there's going to be ground crews to check the configuration of the plane and make sure everything's okay. And the plane just erupts, as you can imagine.
An obvious question here is, why did it take 30 to 60 minutes? So there's two ways to look at this. One is that if I'm sitting there and I'm watching this go on and it takes 30 to 60 minutes until they make the announcement, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's obviously not something that serious. If it was super serious, they would have turned around immediately and headed back to New York. What's going on is when you have a maintenance issue like that, the pilots go onto the flight deck and they're trying to resolve the situation. And what they're generally doing is on a satellite phone, calling back to the operations center, and they're talking with people back there. They're talking with the people at the airline, the maintenance people, they're talking with the dispatcher, and they're trying to resolve the situation to continue the flight. If they can't resolve it, then they're going to have to return. When we make a satellite call to the operations center, we're calling into a room like this, where we can get access to anyone we need because we become a priority. And while we're on the phone with them, we're talking to people in maintenance, they can actually pull up the screens and see exactly what we see in real time. So they can help us try to resolve the situation. Recently, as a pilot flying, I had a similar situation to Jaume's flight on a route like this one. But in this case, on the flight that I was on, while we were crossing the ocean, getting ready to cross, we had a malfunction with something going on actually with our wing. And we called and we talked to maintenance. They looked at the situation, they talked with us, and they said, hey, we think based off of our numbers that you're safe to go, but it's your decision, what do you want to do? And then we talked about it amongst ourselves. There was 3 of us that day. We talked about it amongst ourselves and we said, you know what, let's just go back. Now that cost the airline a lot of money, a lot. But we go back in, we land, they take maybe 30, 40 minutes to fix whatever the problem is, and we take off again and we go across the ocean. The thing that I want to point out here is that the airline told us they thought we were good to go. Maintenance said they thought we were good to go, but we felt as a crew better to play it safe, go in and land, get the problem fixed. The thing is that the airline never said anything to me. Never got a call, never got an email. The chief pilot never said anything to me. They didn't care, and they spent a lot of money for us to go back. But they're not up there on the plane. They're on the ground, and they're saying, hey, we think it's fine. But I'm on the plane, and we're making a decision, hey, this seems like maybe it might be an issue. I'd rather not be flying across the ocean with this specific issue that we had. Now, some pilots are better communicators than others. I don't know that I would have worded it in this way.
The captain comes on and he says, I'm very sorry, but we have a fuel issue.
The pilot is trying to give some basic information to everyone on the aircraft so they know what's going on. Realize that they're not going to explain the whole fuel system of the plane, but there's really not a lot you can say in that situation that's going to make people feel, oh, this is totally fine. Because the only reason you're turning back to go back to your base or back to JFK is there's a problem. So people know that no matter what you say, that things are not normal on the plane. So would I have worded it differently? Maybe, but it doesn't really matter, because no matter what you say, people are going to be nervous because it's an abnormal situation. And this part right here is really important to remember for later in the video.
And when we get back, there's going to be ground crews to check the configuration of the plane and make sure everything's okay.
We tell passengers there's going to be people waiting for us as soon as we land, so that way when we land and there's fire trucks and lights and things that are going all around the plane, people are aware and they are a little bit more relaxed because they said, okay, well, they said to expect extra people around the plane, so that's what's going on right now. Just realize that we do that because anytime your plane is going to go back to land in an abnormal situation, which is what this was, they're always going to get the fire trucks out and the ambulances out and everybody's going to come out and all their lights are going to be on. And if you're on the plane, you could obviously get nervous for obvious reasons.
What I'm thinking in the moment is there's a fuel issue on this plane and we're thousands of miles out over the Atlantic Ocean. Like hours from any land? Like, what? This is not good. I go over and talk to one of the flight attendants. She says it's some kind of fuel leak. Like, we have 2 hours to get back to New York. You don't know what's gonna happen.
When I was a kid, we used to play this game called Telephone. You would whisper something into someone's ear, and then they would whisper it to someone else, and someone else, and it would come all the way back around to you, and it would be something completely different than what I originally said. That's kind of what's happening here.
I go over and talk to one of the flight attendants. She says it's some kind of fuel leak.
That flight attendant probably has great intentions to pass along the correct information to you, but the reality is that the captain probably told the lead flight attendant, which is known as a purser, that purser probably told everybody else, or maybe another flight attendant, which then told this flight attendant, which then told Jaume, which is the guy who's making this video. And so all along that way, there could be misinterpretations that's going on by the time it comes out and making this video. I'm not saying that he misunderstood what the flight attendant was saying or that the captain didn't say that, but that's often the situation. So you just have to realize the source where the information is coming from. And you can hear Jaume getting nervous about being hours away from land right here.
We have 2 hours to get back to New York. You don't know what's going to happen.
But realize that all airlines and all plane manufacturers have a code or a rule that they need to follow, which is that if they're going to fly over water, their plane has to be able to demonstrate the ability to fly 1, 2, or 3 hours, depending on the plane, depending on all the different things that that airline has. But let's say it's 3 hours. The plane has to be able to demonstrate that that plane has the ability to fly on one engine for 3 hours to safely get to an airport. And so when they plan these routes for the planes to fly on across the ocean, they're planning exactly that. Okay, from this point, they can get to here, this airport, within 3 hours. And the plane has the capacity to fly on one engine for 3 hours to get there. So all that planning is done. So when you're going across the ocean, it's not like you're just out there and we're just, okay, let's just go direct to this country in the middle of the ocean. That's not how it works. They build these routes with these overlapping circles to make sure that you were always within range to safely be able to get to an airport on only one engine. So his concern about being over the water and being hours from land is a valid concern. I doubt he knows about this procedure that's set up or the testing that the plane manufacturers have to do or that the airlines have to demonstrate and all of that stuff. I'm sure he's unaware of that, as most people are unaware of that. Just realize that the planes are able to fly several hours in any given direction to get safely to a destination where they can land if they only have one engine. Now, if this was back in the 60s and your plane was to lose an engine while you were over the ocean, yeah, you're in trouble. You're probably going for a swim and you're probably not going to make it. But in today's aviation, it's different. There's a lot of rules in place to make sure that the general public is safe, and one of them is this. If your engine fails in the middle of the ocean, you're going to be okay.
We're seeing the city night lights, and I finally see New York, and I'm like, man, we're this close. The captain comes over the speakers and said, hey, this is going to be a normal landing. He's reassuring us that we're going to be landing normally. So that honestly doesn't really make me feel so great. When we finally reach the gate, there's like fire trucks and ambulances surrounding the plane, which gives you an idea of like the potential severity of the situation. I mean, fortunately, it was caught early enough where it wasn't an issue, but it could have been something much worse.
You could categorize airline pilots having different types of landings. One would be a normal landing, but you could also have something more severe called a precautionary landing. A precautionary landing is, hey, we're going to be landing, but we're on the brink of being on an emergency. There could be a massive problem here. So him saying that there is a normal landing right here.
The captain comes over the speakers and said, hey, this is going to be a normal landing. He's reassuring us that we're going to be landing normally.
He's telling everybody that's on the aircraft, hey, this is going to be a normal landing. So that way the guy who's jacked up on adrenaline, that's sitting next to the emergency exit, as soon as the plane slows down, he doesn't just rip the door off and throw it out and be like, I'm the hero, I'm going to save everybody. He's wanting that not to happen because it's a normal landing. He's also letting the flight attendants know, hey, this is all going to be normal. Even though they would have got that information ahead of time, he's telling everybody it's going to be a normal landing so that way people don't do something wild like open the emergency doors. If you were to have someone rip one of these doors off while the plane is trying to land, you could have a serious problem. Don't think that airline pilots don't understand the responsibility of having everybody that's on our plane. We're not going to sugarcoat something. If we think that there's going to be a serious problem, we want you to be as safe as possible because you are our responsibility and you are entrusting us to safely get you to your destination or safely get you back on the ground. So we're not going to sugarcoat something and then all of a sudden as soon as we land be like, psych, run! That's not what's going to happen. They're going to tell you exactly what to be planning for so that way you can be as safe as possible. Also remember, we were on that plane ourselves. There are no ejection seats for us. So if something goes wrong, we are there with you. Now remember earlier in the video where he mentioned people coming and checking out the plane?
And when we get back, there's going to be ground crews to check the configuration of the plane and make sure everything's okay.
He said that to keep people calm in this exact situation. If people have heard, hey, there's going to be ambulances and fire trucks around us as soon as we land, if people know that an hour or two before they get there, then when they see that, they're a little bit more relaxed. And then Jaume says this.
Enough where it wasn't an issue, but it could have been something much worse.
Yes, it obviously could have been worse. It could always have been worse. You could have driven to the grocery store and come back, and then you come back home into your house and you go, okay, I'm home safe. Well, it could have been worse. You could have gotten run over by a truck, or a plane could have crashed into your grocery store. Like, it could always be worse. But anytime you have an abnormality and you have to come back in and land, it's going to look exactly like this. We would rather have those people there in the event that there is something that does go on that we didn't know about or didn't see or weren't aware of. We would rather have those people there. And there are firefighters that are on all these airports in case there is a real problem. But since they know that we're coming back, why not have them dressed up and ready to go and be there in case there's a problem? I guess it would be like this. If there was in your neighborhood a bunch of fires going on, and you were to have 2 fire trucks with a bunch of firemen that are hanging out right in front of your house, would that make you feel more safe or less safe? You would rather have them there in case there is a problem. They're right there and ready to help fight the fire to protect your house. And that's how you should be thinking about it. When you come in and land and they're coming in and following you, even though there isn't an issue, it's better to have them there and not need them than the other way around.
As we were leaving the plane, the captain recognized me. I got to get into the cockpit and actually ask him, like, what happened.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Well, what actually happened? Like, there was a...
So we actually had a fuel imbalance. So
Yeah.
this is the right main fuel tank, and this is the left main fuel tank.
Yeah.
And there's a huge disparity, and we were not able to automatically or manually balance the fuel.
Wow.
So we could not continue the flight.
So a little bit after that, the captain was kind of like explaining what could have happened on the plane. It sounds like the fuel imbalance is a really, really severe situation. Like, fortunately, we were able to get back without an issue, but it's a good thing he caught it as quickly as he did, because what he was saying was that if that fuel imbalance, I guess there's 2 different sides of the plane. I guess there's 2 different fuel tanks, and if one of them has more fuel than the other for whatever reason, I guess it was some kind of mechanical error, one of the engines can flame out on the plane, and that would have been a really bad situation. But he caught it, early enough to save all our lives, basically.
I make a joke sometimes with my medical friends when they'll tell me about a story that happened earlier that day where they say, oh, a guy came in today and he had a knife wound and I saved his life. I go, man, that's crazy, because just yesterday I saved 450 lives in an afternoon when I took my school bus that was hurtling through the sky and I landed on a 150-foot piece of wide pavement, and then I rolled it out and taxied it into the parking area after flying them across the globe. And if you think that makes me sound ridiculous, then that's kind of what I feel like when he says this.
Save all our lives, basically.
I realized that he felt his life was at risk when they were coming back into land, but the reality is he was no more at risk coming into land back in JFK than he was when he was leaving JFK to start with, which was basically 0. Obviously, there's a risk in everything that you do, but coming back into land at JFK is no more risky than when he left. And during the fuel imbalance part right here,
and if one of them has more fuel than the other for whatever reason, I guess it was some kind of mechanical error, one of the engines can flame out.
Realize that a fuel imbalance is not something that needs to be caught. So I'm sure that pilot that recognized it, I'm sure he's smart and very well trained and all of these things. But realize that even if you don't have a super smart pilot like me, you are still going to be okay, because the plane is going to tell you that there's a problem. The pilots don't need to find the problem. The plane is going to recognize that there is a problem and then notify you. Hey, pilot, there's a problem here and we have a fuel imbalance. So that way it doesn't go unnoticed, because pilots and people in general are bad managers of monitoring things. The plane is always going to notify you. Once it notifies you, there's a book that we have on there. That book on the plane is going to give you a bunch of steps that the engineers who built the plane have laid out. Do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to try to resolve this problem. So it's not something that the pilot caught, like if he didn't catch it, then what would have happened? That's not how it works. The plane is going to notify you so that way you can resolve the problem before it becomes a real issue. And then this part about the engine flaming out.
One of the engines can flame out on the plane, and that would have been a really bad situation.
The only way that that engine is going to flame out is going to be if it runs out of gas. There's not going to be, oh, there's too much fuel in this tank, so then this engine is going to quit working. That's not how it's going to work. And that's why there's multiple fuel tanks. So if you have multiple fuel tanks on there and one fuel tank were to get a massive leak, then that engine might stop working because there's no more fuel in that fuel tank, but you can isolate that fuel tank and keep it independent. And now you're running on one engine because that engine's out of gas, so it's not working anymore. So now that engine's not working, but just like I talked about earlier, you can fly safely on just one engine to your destination. I recently had a video of a plane that actually had a massive fuel leak that was recorded, and I talked about what would happen in this situation if you were to have a fuel leak like this. But just realize that the plane is able to isolate a fuel leak, so that way if you have fuel leak on one side, then you can isolate it. Now, if all of your fuel tanks start pouring out fuel everywhere, okay, well now you're in trouble. But the likelihood of that happening is very unlikely. Now, I don't think Jaume was intentionally trying to scare people here. I think that he was genuinely scared. I mean, he was scared enough to start crying while he was making the video. But I do think this title up for the video was a bit misleading. But if he hadn't put that title up there, it's possible that this video doesn't start trending on YouTube. I don't end up making this video and sharing with you his experience and explaining, so that way if you are ever in a similar situation, you're not feeling panicky. And I know some of you are watching this thinking, oh, well, of course this pilot is going to say these things that it's safe because he needs to save his job. I don't fly the general public, so whether you fly on a plane or not, it really makes no difference to me. The people that I fly is generally the military, or I fly professional sports teams, and those people are going to get on the plane whether they want to get on the plane or not. So it doesn't matter to me if you want to get on the plane, but I want you to have the factual information, so if you ever are on a flight and something does go wrong, you already know kind of what to expect and what's going on. In fact, it would be better for me if I think about it that you don't fly, because then I could have the whole road to myself while I'm catching a flight going to work or going somewhere. So on second thought, yes, planes are dangerous. They are the devil. Stay away from planes. Stay at home in your basement. That's the only place it's safe. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy one of these two over here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.